Time for a little controversy, just the way you guys like it on the traditional press. We're going to be talking about pacifism today. I know that there's a lot of debate upon this particular subject, so I thought that it was time that we did a little bit of deep diving from a Christian monarchist perspective on the whole subject of pacifism and whether or not there is any way to be able to pull out of the Christian scriptures a defense for pacifism or a defense for violent aggression. Can Christians kill each other? Can Christians kill non-Christians? Can we assault each other? Can we salt the fields? What's the deal here? Is God a God that can tolerate, is the Christian God a God that can tolerate violence? Or, as the argument goes, are feet that are swift to shed the blood of their enemies or of others, feet that are swift to shed blood? I'm not getting the verse 100% right. Are they going to be vile and destined for the eternal flame, as it were? So let's get into it a little bit. So, first things first, we're going to go straight to the New Testament, and we are going to talk about some of the passages that are going to be related to this subject. And we're going to spend a lot of time in Christian theological areas because that's what we're concerned with. The secular world obviously has their opinion. Every other religion is going to have their opinions. And I think that it's really important that we talk about everything from a Christian perspective so that we can know exactly where, we're supposed to draw the line on certain things. And you hear all the time, people say things like, the church condemns violence in all its forms. And when you hear people say things like that, and you hear these pacifists talking about their different rhetorics, then it's like, well, this is actually a super important topic. And even in my own circles, I know pacifists, I know people that are perfectly comfortable joining the military. I know people in all different, sections of the aisle. And a lot of times it comes down to emotional arguments, but there isn't a ton of sections in the New Testament that talk about this, but there are some, and some that might surprise you. I've got several different passages here that we're going to talk about, and the first one comes from the execution of Ananias and Sapphira by Peter, as recorded in Acts 5, verses 1 through 12. And at first you're going to say, well, wait a minute, execution? That's a whole nother level. Well, if you read the passage in context, it makes it pretty clear that Peter nixed these people for what they did. And here's the verse. But a certain man named Ananias, with Sapphira his wife, sold a possession, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things. And the young men arose and wrapped him up, carried him out, and buried him. Now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter answered her, Tell me whether you sold the land for so much. She said, Yes, for so much. Then Peter said to her, How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, and carrying her out, buried her by her husband. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. And this is the important verse for our purposes here. And through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. So you say, well, A lot of people hear this passage and they say, well, it wasn't Peter that was doing the execution. Clearly it was God. Miraculously, these people died. What do you mean Peter is executing people in the early church? And then we got to take a step back in order to answer this question because, well, obviously it's this miraculous power. The miraculous power is coming from God, but never is a miracle separated anywhere else from the person engaged in doing the miracle. Additionally, the great passage talking about miracles, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will be able to move mountains. You will be able to move mountains. Through what? Through the miraculous power of God, you will be able to do a thing. Every single time that we have an instance of laying on hands or of raising someone from the dead, we accept the fact that this and that certain person performed this and that certain act, and by them, through the power of God, through their hands, they were able to go and do the particular thing. We never separate out the person performing the miraculous act from the act itself. And this should not be an exception to that, especially because verse 12 here in Acts chapter 5 specifically says, and through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people. It specifically says, through their hands. Immediately following this passage, immediately, the next verse is they're doing this with their hands. So there's really not a good argument in terms of, well, God's doing it, but the people aren't doing it. And, Peter was there and his words really didn't matter and his judgment didn't matter. And the fact that he held Ananias and Sapphira accountable, that wasn't relevant. It was God that killed them. Well, if that was really the case, why was Peter there at all? God would have just killed Ananias and Sapphira without ever needing Peter to be involved in the subject. Peter is clearly necessary for this to happen. The whole coming before the leadership of the people, of which, Peter was obviously the leader at that time. There's no way that you can separate out Peter from this. There's no way to look at this other than a situation where the leader of the Christian church in this particular place and time holds these two particular people accountable for what they did and executes them upon failure to, follow the rules or whatever. And maybe, we don't know, maybe God told Peter that this was something that was supposed to happen. Maybe he just informed Peter that this was supposed to happen. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but we do know that it specifically says, through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done. There's no way that you can say, oh, well, that wasn't a sign or a wonder. That seems pretty significant to me. That would be a sign to everyone in the church. Don't do what they did. And it's wondrous in a terrifying way. So I know I'm talking a lot about this particular passage, but I think it's important because we have to understand what a miracle is and how it is actually performed. So yes, God can perform a miracle on his own, but no recorded instance of, or not no, almost all of the recorded instances of miracles all take place through the hands of a particular wonder worker. And so that's just the way it's working, So, we have other instances of violence in the scriptures. Remember, we're trying to do a little bit of a deep dive here, which is one of my favorite things to do on this particular channel here. So, and the next one we're going to look at is just violence sort of in general, which is, the fact that Jesus used violence to drive money changers out of the temple. And that's recorded in John 2:15. It says that when he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. That is pretty hard to deny that Jesus is comfortable using violence to accomplish certain means. You could say, well, he didn't kill anybody. Come on. Okay. Calm down. No, he didn't kill anybody. But he whipped them. We talk about this sometimes on this channel. That is super serious. If you've never been whipped before, you can't understand how violent a whipping is. It's extraordinarily violent. And Jesus, the God-man, is employing violence in order to ensure something specific. And that is the sanctity of the temple. So we have an instance here, okay, we can see that in certain specific cases, it is helpful and necessary to use violence to keep things pure. Just broad violence. But it's important. And it's important to remember. We can say, well, maybe Jesus never took anybody's life. Okay, that's fine. Maybe he didn't. But you're probably only thinking about the New Testament. We have a lot more to talk about too, and that's going to include the Old Testament, and that's going to include Revelation. And that brings us directly into our next passage, which is going to come in Revelation, where it says that Jesus himself is coming with a sword to strike the nations. So our passage here is Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 16. Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. There it is. Jesus is coming back with a sword to smite the nations. And like a winepress, I'm imagining myself as a wee little grape under the feet of the Almighty God. Remember, this perspective that we're talking about here today is from a Christian perspective. And it is super important to talk about whether or not Christians can engage in violence, whether or not God can engage in violence, because we have to understand how we are supposed to interact with governments, how we are supposed to interact with police, how we are supposed to interact with abject immorality and the absolute breakdown in moral codes, and how we're supposed to interact with each other in these situations. And if we're thinking only turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek, turn the other cheek, as though that's the only passage in the whole Bible, we are going to end up in a very difficult place where they're just going to destroy us for no reason. And that's, you're getting my bias out of here before you're getting all the proofs that I've collected. But we do have an example here. Okay, Jesus uses a whip in his incarnation, and he whips people. So that's an example of general violence. He's not killing anybody. But then in Revelation, when he comes back, he is absolutely leading armies to war. It specifically says war, leading armies to war. And what, of course, this is referencing is the Battle of Armageddon, where the blood will flow so high it will be up to the horses' bridles. So that's a lot of killing. My next passage here, of course, is the most famous of all of the passages typically cited by those who try to support self-defense and other things, supporting the owning of firearms and other things. And it's super important because Jesus says to his disciples to go and sell their cloaks and buy a sword in one place. And he says, don't take a sword in another place. And this is also important because there's a time for violence and a time for peace. And the passage here is in Luke chapter 22, verses 35 through 38. And he said to them, when I sent you without money bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? So they said nothing. And he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. So they said, Lord, look, Here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. This passage is probably the most important passage of all the New Testament talking about violence. There's a level of restraint that is obvious. They said, well, we've got 2 swords. He's like, that's good enough. Just make sure that you have some. I told you before, go out without a knapsack, without satchels, without even basically shoes on your feet. No swords, complete trust in me. Now I'm telling you, and this is, right before he goes to his execution, Jesus is telling them. So place in the position of Scripture and in the timeline is going to really make a big difference in this particular exploration of this subject. And he says, make sure that you have swords, but exercise restraint. This isn't, go out and slay everybody on the planet that you think you should go out and slay. This is, yes, have swords. The only purpose of a sword is fighting other men. It's not like a spear, which you can use for hunting, or a bow, which is, it's for hunting. No, swords are for killing people. That is the only purpose of a sword. It is the only purpose for a sword. You can't use it for hunting. You can't use it for cooking. You can't use it for anything other than waging war with other people, which is why so often in religious texts they mention the sword as opposed to the spear, even though the spear was way more commonly used as a weapon in time of war. But the spear could be translated into, it's this, sort of a hunting implement. Sometimes we're using, the sword can never be misconstrued that way. It can never be misunderstood. The purpose of the sword, kill the peoples. And here it says, it is enough. And one of those swords is the sword that Peter uses to chop off the ear of Caiaphas's servant. And Jesus says, no, I told you to have the swords. That's great that you have swords. Not right now. My mission has not been accomplished. I'm supposed to go and die. Let me heal this ear. It's not time for you to use the sword yet. And that's actually going to bring up the next issue here, which is Solomon. And I know I'm jumping out of the New Testament a little bit, but I'll get back to our other passage with the New Testament. But Solomon, who is recorded as being the wisest man who ever lived, so let's pay attention to the things that he has to say. He says that there's a time for war and time for peace. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 8 says, there's a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. And that is what was happening when Jesus was talking to his disciples, when Peter whips out his sword, thinking that he's going to defend Jesus from this, enormous mob. Talk about some guts, man. The soldiers are showing up, all this mob's showing up. They've probably got torches and clubs and all sorts of other armaments. And he's like, I'll fight you all, like, wow, okay, cool. It's pretty awesome. You and your one sword, or two, you and your buddy are going to fight off this whole mob. I mean, it's impressive, no doubt, but nah, bro. But it's really important that we understand, okay, restraint. All of the Christian life is about balance. Everything about happiness, everything about being a Christian always comes down to an issue of balance. We are attempting to be balanced as people. If you stray too far to this side, you end up a coward. You stray too far to this side, you end up being a bloodthirsty maniac. Neither one of these two extremes is healthy for us. We need to be centered. We need to know how to defend ourselves. We need to know how to engage in wars, but we have to be careful. And we'll get back into our last passage here, which is in the New Testament. Paul says that the government has swords, and that's a good thing. And our passage here is Romans chapter 13, verses 3 through 4, which says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And there we have the culmination, the fruition, the foundation of our principles regarding the use of the sword in the modern world. Because Paul specifically says the sword is a good thing, and its purpose is to avenge and to execute wrath on those who practice evil. Why? Because they are God's minister. The term here would be icon of justice. They are the physical manifestation of the justice of God on earth. He, the king, with his sword, swooping on down on his white horse to avenge evils, to cast off the reign of tyrannical robber barons, or whatever you can imagine. The king's knights riding into the field and rescuing fair damsel from, wicked men. That is the execution of God's wrath. And it can only happen with the sword. And he says, don't be afraid of the sword. It's a good thing. It exists in order to avenge evil, to right wrongs. And he is specifically a minister of God in this area. And this here is sort of the be-all, end-all, and I have other passages too that we're going to discuss, but everything culminates to this particular point. Give the government the swords they need and trust them to act on the issue of justice. And when that happens appropriately, justice will be served. God will have his ministers on earth. When this is happening, this is an excellent and good thing. But there's more. And what we're going to talk about more here, too, is David, before he was king. He was aghast that there was a giant who could be allowed to defy the armies of the living God. And because he was angry that these people were defying God, he took up arms. And our passage here is in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 through 37. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." Moreover, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Why I bring this up is threefold. First, there's the instance of violence against lions and bears. And that is a slightly unrelated point, but it's still necessary because the world is a violent place. It's a violent experience that we have. That's why it's so important to have men, because it's a violent world that we live in. The lions and the bears are all gone from our consciousness now because we've created such a weak and pathetic and sad and safe world that the manly urges that we have to defend and to protect don't feel like they have anywhere to go. But we forget that the nature of the world hasn't changed. It's only our perception of the world that's changed. We've built this fake construct of a world that has no bearing in actual reality. And David says, I protected my flock against the sheep. Not only did that make me strong, but I was engaging in an activity that prepared me for today. And of course, this has to do with the whole issue of vegetarianism and all these other things. Part of what is, really weak with us today is we can't conscience the idea of killing animals. Well, there's not much to be said for the benefits of vegetarianism because there's an aspect of preparation for violence that is necessary in the sacred ritual of killing animals. And I don't say, oh, you should just go kill any animal that you come across. No, come on. Balance. Balance is everything. Respect of the world is absolutely critical. Respect of the natural world. We are called to be lords of the earth, to protect the earth, to till the ground, to tend to the earth. And part of that process is the killing of animals. And one of the reasons why we kill animals is in a sacred preparation for the protecting of that which is beautiful when violent aggressors come. And I know that this is kind of a take that you probably haven't heard before, but it's super important. That's one of the reasons why you should trust hunters more than you should trust vegans, because the vegans are weak. Now, please understand that I am not standing here trying to condemn people. There could be 10 million different reasons. It could be health reasons for veganism. I don't care about all that kind of particular stuff. That's not the point. The point is, a hunter has a sacred relationship with his animals, and this is proven by the conservation efforts that hunters take in order to better the land, in order to better the hunting experience, and this incredible relationship between hunter and prey. You say, well, the prey doesn't like it very much. Doggone it, deer are prey, and whether or not humans are hunting them or wolves are hunting them, that's part of their existence. And it is a sacred ritual. And you don't shoot the babies as hunters. I wonder why that is. Babies are more tender, they're easier to find, they're a lot more easy to kill, but we don't kill the babies. Why? Because there's a relationship that you have. I think a lot about the Native American experience of, thanking the animal for the sacrifice of their life in order to give me life, which is literally what's happening. Now, in our instances, as Christians, we pray over our meals, thanking God for the life that meal is giving us, asking him to bless the meal. It's the same sort of concept. It's just the Christian view versus the Native American view. And I know I'm getting hung up on this, but it is a really important thing because it is preparation for the manliness that is to come. And because we have broken in the natural world our relationship to the food that we are eating, we have broken our ability to be strong enough to defend good things. And I think it's terrible what we've done. And we need to have more hunters. I 100% encourage hunting. I encourage farming. I encourage all of that because it's good for us. You don't want to just have burgers every day from McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King or wherever you're having them without ever thinking about the cow. It's not good for you. We need to go there and we need to get strong because this is a harsh world. The other thing that's happening with this situation with David is the abject abhorrence of the idea that first thing is, we have to be able to fight and kill animals. That's a violent world. Second thing is, fighting and killing animals is actually a good thing because it's preparing us for what David actually does with Goliath. And this is the third thing here that I've mentioned here. It shows us three things. And this is, David cannot stand the idea that there could be someone who is defying the armies of the living God, spitting in the eye of God, spitting in his faith, in his country, in his worldview, in everything that makes David who David is. And in the, this is pagan Philistine versus godly Jew. This is what's going on here. This is a spiritual battle. And we see that it's a spiritual battle because it's the champion of evil versus the champion of God. And David can't stand this. And we see that this is perfectly acceptable, what he does here. Perfectly acceptable to go and engage in violent combat against the armies of the living, against the enemies of the living God. And we have to remember that because we are called to defend God. What good are we doing when we sit around and say, yeah, you can slander Christianity, you can slander God, you can do all this kind of stuff, but I'm above that. but, God called me to love, and to let you spit in my God's eye is something that I do because I love you. No, that means that you're afraid. It means you don't love God. That's really what it means. It means you don't think that God is worth defending. That's the reality. You're afraid of the consequences. That's the truth. And I'm not talking about having civil discourse with people that disagree with each other. Clearly not. I'm talking about an invasion of secularism whose fruits we know, 100 million people dead last century, plus all of the hundreds of millions of children that were slaughtered in the greatest massacre the universe has ever seen, and the abject destruction and indoctrination of the ones that they let live through horrible ideologies such as the gender dysmorphia nightmare, the abject destruction of what it means to be human, the destruction of just everything that the modern world stands for. And we say, oh, well, turn the other cheek. They can hurt everybody. They can destroy everybody. They can burn everything. It doesn't matter. David didn't think that that was okay. David took up arms to defend the living God, because these people stand up and say, think about how many times great leaders have, great secular leaders have stood up and have spat in the eye of Christendom, have spat in the eye of God, have decried God as an evil and tyrannical being. And Christians just say, yeah, it's fine. No big deal. That's nuts. I'm sorry, but it's insane. And the fruit of that is showing, because the only belief system in the world that is growing today is Islam, because Islam doesn't tolerate that. You can't get away with that. And so they're growing and we're dying. The fruit of your ideology shows. Now, it must be said that I do not support you standing up and shooting somebody that you disagree with. That is inappropriate. And that's why I brought up the other passages. The passages to do with the government having the sword. The passages to do with restraint. The passages to do with timing. A time for war. A time for peace. There is a time to defend Christianity. There is a time to fight off the enemies of all things that are good and beautiful. There is a time to do this. When and where that time is a different matter. And one of the... You know what? I'm not even going to get into that. You know what? I'm just going to bring up a couple other passages, because it's important to talk about when and where we're going to fight. But there's a couple other passages that I need to mention, because the wealth of scripture that supports this position is so enormous. And the next passage that I have here, and this is talking about the nature of God. The God of the Old Testament is the same God of today, and he once determined that some people were so evil that they had to be destroyed, down to the women and the children. And Saul actually loses the right to kingship for disobeying this order. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 through 4, we read, Samuel also said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore, heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Now the whole of 1 Samuel 15 talks about this, but I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm just going to select verses, and you can go and read the whole chapter and check it out on your own in order to verify everything that I'm saying. But we'll go on to verses 17 through 19, which say, So Samuel said, When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? Verse 26, But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Natures. The nature of God has not changed. The God of the Old Testament is the same God as today, and the God of the Old Testament once thought that an entire people group were so vile and so evil that they must be destroyed down to the children. Now let's talk about restraint, because the big issue that people bring up with Christians and violence is, how could God support killing, innocent, nursing babies? And the answer to that is complicated and difficult, and not to be blithely smoothed over, because it's really serious that God would command an exterminatus of an entire people. So we have to ask, first of all, well, if we as Christians believe that God has the right to do something like this, how does he get that right? And how does he know? And, those sorts of questions. Those are the first questions that we have. And the answer to that is, well, God is the ultimate judge of all people. And the only way to engage in justice is to judge and then to execute justice. So we have to, at some point, have faith that God looked into the hearts of the Amalekites, looked into their history, looked into their deeds, knew who they were, knew what they did, and judged them and said, you must be destroyed. And of course, any student of the Old Testament could bring up any number of times when God, completely annihilated people groups, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Great Flood, and the Amalekites. Well, he was supposed to utterly eliminate the Amalekites, but he did not. Saul did not, and it was really serious. So we have to have faith that God can look down and say, okay, you guys are so evil that you must be destroyed. So it's easy for us to imagine a people group that's so evil. It's easy for me, at least. It might not be easy for you, but it's easy for me to imagine a people group that are so evil and vile and despicable and wicked and utterly devoid of any goodness that it's like, okay, it's time for you to go. Goodbye. You have to be done now. This is over. We can't live like this anymore. And think about the most evil things you can possibly imagine. Anything you can think of, the most wicked, horrible things. Well, you know what? Probably the Amalekites were doing those things, and we have to have faith that God is capable of doing that level of justice. If you don't think that God knows who is or is not worthy of being destroyed, then you think that that your version of love is greater than God's version of love. And I can understand that, because most of us are very comfortable believing that what we think and feel is right and true. And the question then becomes, well, how much do you really love people? God knows every sparrow that falls from the sky. He clothes the lilies of the valleys, and he loves every single person. How many people do you drive past on a daily basis that you couldn't care less about? How many people do you think are ridiculous? How many people do you hate? Well, God loves all the people. You say, well, how can you justify that love? What do you mean God loves all the people? Well, God doesn't want the Amalekites to do what they were doing, and he doesn't want the babies to grow up in an Amalekite universe. And the only way to keep the babies from growing up in an Amalekite world is to utterly eliminate that culture from the face of the earth. And what happens if you don't eliminate that culture? Say, for example, you just kill the adults, the ones that we can hold culpable for this particular lifestyle that they were living. Well, the problem is the babies are all going to grow up and say, you killed my dad, now I'm going to kill you. It's nuts. You can't do that. It's insane. And so basically what you're doing is you're entrusting the innocent babies to the care of God, saying, well, They're innocent. They haven't committed any atrocities yet. God will judge them. And because they're innocent, they'll get to go to heaven, and that'll be the end of that. So what's the problem here? So then you say, well, can we just kill any baby we want then because they're going to heaven? Technically, maybe, but it will come at the cost of your soul. So I don't recommend it. It's a horrifying thought. Don't do that. That's insane. But God required Saul to do this. And we have to say at that point, exterminatus is sketchy, man. Sketchy. I wouldn't do that ever unless God said to do it. Like, that's sketchy. I don't know, man. Like, whew. If God gave us the command to do it, though, as Christians, you got to do it, and you got to be ready to do it. And if you don't do it, there's going to be consequences. Saul lost the ability to be king because he didn't follow orders. And this was a really serious order. And the Amalekites were a thorn in the Israelites' side for the next 1,000 years because Saul didn't do this thing. And they were constantly attacking and mad at the Israelites because, you attacked us and way back in the day, and you did all these things. And he created a mortal enemy as opposed to eliminating a cancer, which was the Amalekites. And I'm not going to lie, this is a super complicated issue, and I could probably talk for an hour on the issue of the Amalekites, but at the end of the day, I bring this passage up. I didn't bring up the flood or this or that, but I bring it up because it's an issue of morals, it's an issue of justice, and it's an issue of attacking someone else, which lets us know that sometimes God thinks it's perfectly acceptable to go and attack somebody. We're just going to hold on to that. We're going to remember that, and we're going to think about it, but we're not going to do anything with that quite yet. We're going to move on a little bit. So some of our other passages here, which are important as well, is, this is pre-Jesus, but John the Baptist, when he was questioned by soldiers on how to behave, tells them to behave honorably, but he pointedly does not tell them to stop being soldiers. And our verse here is Luke chapter 3, verses 14. Some soldiers were questioning him, saying, "And what about us? What shall we do?" And he said to them, "Do not take money from anyone by force, or accuse anyone falsely, and be content with your wages." That's it. He could have said, "Give up your arms." And he should have said, "Give up your arms," when he's asked on what to do. If he did not say it when he was supposed to say it, that's a very big flaw in John the Baptist. Super big, super important. No, bad. But he does not. So we have to trust that John the Baptist said what needed to be said and did not say what did not need to be said. Additionally, Paul compares Christians to soldiers, which is clearly a gross oversight if soldiering is wicked. And our chapter here is in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. "Suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No soldier in active service entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life so that he may please the one who enlisted him as a soldier." Again, if being a soldier is a bad thing, why are you comparing a good thing to a bad thing? That's like, be like moldy bread. Are you retarded? No, that's crazy. And then Peter says that governments, this is in reference to our issue with the government having the sword. He says that governments are supposed to punish evildoers. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 14, he says, "And to the governors who have been appointed by him to punish the evildoers and to praise those who do good." Again, and that just re-supports the issue with Paul saying, it's good for the government to have the sword. It's a good thing. But additionally, God has never been peaceful. God is not a peaceful God. God is a loving God, but it never says God is a peaceful God. You say, well, it says that he's the Prince of Peace. Okay, yeah, but what kind of peace are we talking about? Are we talking about peace from war, or are we talking about internal peace, which is only possible to those who are fully human and fully filled with God. Jesus said that he specifically came to bring a sword to the earth. That's an extremely powerful statement. Matthew 10, verse 34 says, "Don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword." Crazy important. Jesus didn't come to bring peace to the earth. He says, "I did not come to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword." Remember, what is a sword? A sword is an implement that only exists to kill people, to fight, to engage in battles. It is a tool of war and nothing else. God even gave specific instructions to the children of Israel in the Old Testament as how to behave in war. And he tells them to be brave, to fight well. He tells the priests, the very instruments of God on earth, to be heavily involved in blessing the soldiers and boosting their morale, as well as calling upon them to be moral. He reminds them that the living God will be with the soldiers when they go to fight. And unless you believe that God's very nature changed with the New Testament, you must see a God who encourages his people to fight and actually goes down and fights with them. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 1 through 4. "When you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt, will be with you. When you are about to go into battle, the priest shall come forward and address the army. He shall say, 'Hear, Israel, today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory.'" Imagine the priests of the people of the modern day going before the armies of Christendom and saying that benediction before they go into battle. Imagine what a tremendously different world it would be if Christians stopped pretending to be secular first and foremost and claimed God as their authority. Not themselves, restraint, always restraint, but are able to fight for Christ, are able to fight for Christendom, and are not going to put up with people making fun of God anymore. They're not going to put up with slandering Christianity, with defaming Christianity. And I'm not talking about civil discourse. I am a huge fan of civil discourse, but the anti-theist movement is filled with just people who are just enemies of God. Not people who are being nice about it, not people who are trying to have a reasonable conversation, not people who just disagree. No, these people are intentionally attempting to destroy Christianity. That's the whole purpose of the anti-theist movement, is the destruction of Christianity. And somehow we're just supposed to be like chill and cool with it. Like, yeah, destroy Christianity. It's fine. Well, it's fine. We'll just evangelize our way out of this hole. That ain't working. So, those are some of the very important passages in Scripture. Now, we have to talk about the turn the other cheek passage, which I have got almost pulled up here. Turn the other cheek. Okay, which is in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 40. Jesus is saying, "Ye have heard that it has been said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say unto you, do not resist evil. But whoever shall strike thee on thy right cheek, turn to him also the other. And to him that would go to law with thee, and take thy body, and take thy coat, leave him thy cloak also." This is the passage regarding pacifism. Everything in pacifism always comes down to this passage. And we have to talk about it because it's the thing that is always referenced, and we can't just say, okay, well, ignore it, But this is also the passage, remember, that says, if thy right eye be a snare to thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members perish, and not thy whole body be cast into Gehenna, or hell. And if we're not taking that seriously, I don't see a lot of people gouging out their eyes. Maybe we need to start, take a little bit of a step back here and think about this for a minute. What are we actually talking about? And this is the most incredible, intense, almost impossible sermon ever given in all of the scriptures, It's the Sermon on the Mount, and it's super serious. And if we actually read this and take it seriously, it is terrifying and enormous in its implications. And, of course, I believe in taking things seriously, and I believe in having enormous implications. But remember balance. And when he was done with this particular passage, it says that they were astonished at his doctrine because it was revolutionary. It was us, turn the whole universe upside down. And this whole idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is, to me, talking about the vendetta. And it's talking about not repaying evil with evil. It's talking about loving. And the idea of a vendetta is, well, you hurt me, so therefore I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to hurt you back in exactly the same way that you hurt me, and that's going to be justice. Well, actually, justice is more complicated than that. Yes, it would technically be just if you pluck someone's eye out for your eye to be plucked out, or if you smack somebody in the face for your face to be smacked. It would be just for Will Smith to give an Oscar speech and to have Chris Rock come up and slap him in the face. That would be just. But Jesus says, no, that's not how we're going to live our lives. But pointedly, this is not talking about war. This is not talking about defense. This is not talking about the sword. This is not talking about even the issue of peace on earth. This is specifically talking about giving. This is specifically talking about letting things go. It's specifically talking about going the extra mile, because that's the very next thing that happens here. Verse 41 says, and whoever will compel thee to go 1 mile, go with him 2. To him that asks of thee, and from him that desires to borrow of thee, turn not away. Ye have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who insult you and persecute you, that ye may be the sons of your Father who is in the heavens. For he makes his sun rise on evil and good, and sends rain on just and unjust. If this passage were to mean that there was supposed to be no justice, then that would fundamentally destroy what it means to have morals. It would fundamentally be in conflict with St. Peter and St. Paul. It would fundamentally be in conflict with the nature of God, as we see when he tells Saul to literally exterminate an entire people group. It would be in conflict with David, who prepared for violent battle against the enemies of God by slaying both a lion and a bear. Why didn't David just let the lion and the bear come and eat up all his sheep? Turn the other cheek to the lion and the bear. Why not? Why not? When a man comes and breaks into your house and wants to, rob you and let's make this more complicated. Let's say you live in South Africa and or let's say Kenya. Say you live in Kenya and one of the warlords there takes his people in and comes in and wants to steal away your 12-year-old son to go and fight in his army with him. Why not give him your 6-year-old son as well? That's turning the other cheek. It's insane if you look at it in that regard. Okay, so he wounds you in this way, so therefore you're going to need to go and utterly, maybe, take me as well, and I'll go and fight and kill for you and rape and maraud as much as you could possibly need me to do. As soon as you start thinking about real-world applications and real-world situations, you're like, okay, restraint. Remember, the whole thing with Christianity is about becoming centered, about becoming balanced, not going way too far to one side or way too far to the other side. And a lot of times people will take a particular passage and they'll say, well, take it at face value, and that's all it means. Okay, that's crazy. And if you actually think that, you should have no eyes and no hands and no feet, and you should chop off all your body parts until you're not sinning anymore. And if you're not doing that, then why are you taking this turn the other cheek passage so seriously? And clearly, there's a disconnect between reality and between the face value of some of these passages here. Face value says, well, go the extra mile. Well, that doesn't apply to us anymore, because in that time period and in those specific historical contexts, what that meant was the Roman soldiers had the ability to conscript passersby on the road to carry their burdens for a mile, and they had the legal authority to do this. And this was one of the ways that the soldiers were able to go further and faster and farther than everybody else. And it was, it worked. It stunk. You wouldn't want to have to carry some heavy Legionnaire's pack a mile extra down the road. And Jesus says, don't worry about that. Stop being so selfish. Take the pack an extra mile. Go with him. Show how much you care about him. How much you're willing to go out of your way to take care of people. That's the point of this passage. It's not literally, taking, if we really, really, really want to take it literally, the only time you would turn the other cheek is if you get slapped. If we're going to take it literally, then that's not happening to a lot of us. But if it is, if you do get slapped, okay, well, now I'll turn my other cheeks. Okay, so we're not taking it literally because no Roman soldiers exist anymore. So now we're trying to understand what is the meaning of this particular passage. And the meaning of the passage is simple. It's very simple. It's just do extra, do more for people. Give of yourself more. Love your enemies even. Go above and beyond what is called of you in the natural order of things. Don't try to get your coat back. Don't go through all these crazy legal battles. Don't try to get remunerative justice. Let it go. Show how much you love people. That's it. That's all it is. And when you look at it from that perspective, you're like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't in conflict with protecting my faith, protecting my family, protecting my friends and relatives and relations and neighbors, and I guess that means country. It's not in conflict with these things, nor is it in conflict with the idea of justice, nor is it in conflict with the idea of a government having a sword and being perfectly acceptable, nor is it in conflict with the idea of a champion of justice, such as a David versus Goliath, going and one-on-one dueling it out in front of the whole universe in a, no, God's in charge, not, secular humanism or whatever you're saying is in charge right now. And it doesn't mean vigilante justice, because remember, we're not trying to go crazy far to the other side. We're not talking about that nuts insanity. We are talking about, no, we need a government that is going to be justice, that can perform the office of the minister of God on earth. And that's pretty hard to do when you have secular governments which are fundamentally opposed to Christian values. You say, well, he's still God's minister on earth. What? How can somebody who is absolutely anti-God be the minister of God on earth? He cannot. The office can. The office of officer can be the minister of God on earth, but absolutely it is impossible for somebody who is abjectly opposed to being the minister of God on earth. And you say, well, no. Any single person who's in office, no matter what they're doing, is the minister of God on earth. Oh yeah? Well, why did Saul get kicked out of kingship then? When he disobeyed the simple order to enact justice. If Saul, who was rightfully anointed by God, can lose the authority and the office of kingship, then that could happen to anyone else. And they can no longer be considered the minister of God on earth. David is then anointed as king by Samuel, and David simply waits to allow God to take care of Saul in that particular instance. But David had been anointed as king long before Saul was ever killed. And at that point, that anointing as king, that was the act of submission to a higher power that we consider for our first kingly law. And at that moment, David had been crowned, anointed, crowned, whatever you want to call it, anointed as king of Israel, and that meant that Saul was a usurper. That's what it meant. So if rulers can lose the ability to maintain minister of God on earth status, then that means that rule applies throughout all time. And there's an argument to be made to say that, well, God will cast down the kings, and there's an argument to say, that says that no, we will be the hands and the feet of God on earth, and we will cast down the kings, and we will perform that office, and we're supposed to do this. And I'm not going to get into all that. That's not even the point. The point is, and it's interesting, and I think it's relevant, and I could talk about it, but I just don't want to get into that right now. But the point of this passage is not simply pacifism. It's such a simplistic, not complete interpretation of this passage that it just doesn't make any sense, especially when you start to apply it to real world scenarios. Remember the Kenyan example. If they come and take one of your children, you're going to give your other child too? Is that really going the extra mile at that point? No. The right thing to do in that situation is to go and get your posse together and try and gather as many people as you can and go and wage war on the war leader that stole your son and rescue him. And if you did, everyone on earth will praise you for being a hero, except for crazy people that say, oh, no, you should have turned the other cheek. That's crazy. Everyone knows inherently and throughout all time, everyone has praised the heroic actions of men who can jump into battle and rescue people that need to be rescued, and to fight and to win. And we call those people heroes for a reason, for a very good reason. And there's so many other passages that I could cite in the Bible talking about the incredible deeds. Think about just David's mighty men and all the incredible things that they did, about all the judges and the incredible things that they did, and the wars that were fought on behalf of God by other kings of Israel, and so on. But I wanted mostly to stick to the New Testament and a little bit of the Old Testament to help us get a more rounded and balanced perspective on this question. Really, the only issue that's left is the issue of, well, what happens when your government becomes immoral? And that's a serious issue. And I've talked about that in other videos, so, go watch the other videos, and there'll be a more complete explanation of that. And maybe I'll talk about it again sometime, a more complete answer. I mean, at a certain point, if your government is evil, you can't recognize them as a legitimate government anymore. And our government is beyond evil, wicked, beyond almost all imaginations. I can't even fathom how the people in government can be as evil as they are. But there, and that's the way it is. So, too bad. And when that happens, it's like, okay, well, I denounce you as my government, and I can't serve you in any way. I think you're corrupt and utterly destructive, and there's a certain level of corruption that we can tolerate, and there's a certain level it's like, I'm done with you. I can't. No, absolutely not. I can't support the things that you're doing. And I think that we've reached that point in this country, and we're going to get worse. Much worse. So that point is interesting, but that's really the only point left. At this point, it's really just like, okay, well, pacifism just doesn't make any sense. And the only passage, the number one, the only passage, doesn't really even make sense when you look at it from a pacifistic standpoint. And it's really, really important when you see that the preponderance of evidence in the Bible leans to one particular way versus another way, because this happens all the time for people. They'll find one verse in the Bible and they'll base an entire doctrine off of it. And then there's like 15 verses that say something completely different, the complete opposite. But the one verse says the one thing, so we have to take that verse. And it's like, there's 15 verses that say something completely different. We need to go with the 15, not with the one. That doesn't make sense. That means that you're not understanding the purpose of the one. You're not understanding the point. The point is, try harder, do more, love people better, love your enemies, do good to those that curse you, bless those that curse you, and do good to those that hate you. Love your enemies. That's the point of this passage. The point is, and you say, okay, well, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. What is love, right? Come on. It is possible to love your enemies and shoot them. It is. It's possible that Saul could have loved the Amalekites as he slew them. If it was not possible, then God was wrong, and God is in serious jeopardy. If it is not possible for the government to love those even whom they put to the sword, then there's a serious issue, and we can't have Christians in government. And if you can't have Christians in government, you're in trouble. And the image that comes to my mind is the image of a great queen coming down off her dais as a man is about to be hung, and her coming down and kissing that man's feet, forgiving him, blessing him, and then letting him be hung. That is what I imagine as love for your enemies. You want them to be saved. You want them to know that they are loved, but you can't let them go on being evil. You can't. You can't just let people go on murdering and doing all these other things that they want to do. Why? Because it's bad for them. It's bad for their souls. It's bad for all of society. It's bad for every single person in the entire world if justice no longer reigns. If morals are thrown out, you can't have a society anymore. And you can't even have enemies anymore. So how are you supposed to love your enemies if everyone is not your enemy anymore? And how does somebody become your enemy unless they are actively opposed to the important things that you hold dear? And if there aren't people like that, then there's nobody to love. So it's just, hopefully I've said enough. I feel like I haven't quite explained what I was trying to explain, but I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully I've said enough, because I have a ton more that I need to talk about, and I'm already going way too long. And the next thing that we're going to talk about, so we talk about all the scripture. Now, we're going to talk about early church fathers and what they had to say on the subject, because it's one thing to just listen to me yak on and on and on about this or about that, but it's way more important to listen to the actual church fathers, who will always be 1,000 times more important than me. So I'm going to bring up 3 church fathers here. First one I'm going to bring up is St. Athanasius, who lived in the 300s. And he said, although one is not supposed to kill, the killing of the enemy in time of war is both a lawful and praiseworthy thing. This is why we consider individuals who have distinguished themselves in war as being worthy of great honors, and indeed public monuments are set up to celebrate their achievements. It is evident, therefore, that at one particular time and under one set of circumstances, an act is not permissible, but when time and circumstances are right, it is both allowed and condoned. So that's St. Athanasius, who lived in the 300s. Then we have St. Basil the Great, who said that our fathers did not consider killings committed in the course of wars to be classifiable as murders at all. On the score, it seems to me, of allowing a pardon to men fighting in defense of sobriety and piety. Perhaps, though, it might be advisable to refuse them communion for 3 years on the grounds that their hands are not clean. Perhaps. And, the denying of communion for 3 years was considered an extraordinarily light sentence back then, if you can even imagine that. Like, they were way tougher than we are, like way tougher. Under the influence of St. Gregory, Armenia became the first Christian nation in AD 303. And when Maximinus tried to force the Armenians to renounce Christianity in AD 312, the Armenians took up arms and defended their faith and freedom. They defeated the Roman army. The Armenians are the very first people in all of the world to convert to Christianity, and that's pretty amazing. And that was under the influence of St. Gregory. Another really cool one is the Thundering Legion, which shows that the Thundering Legion was in AD 173. And it shows that very early on, Christians were employed as soldiers. And Eusebius relates that the soldiers in the Melitene Legion would kneel and pray before going into battle, as was the custom of the Christians, he said specifically. In a particular battle with Germans, the legion was in dire thirst. Due to the prayers of the Christian soldiers, God sent rain to refresh them, while he sent lightning to confuse their enemies. The legion went on to triumph against their enemies due to the influence of the Christian soldiers. All the way in AD 173, we have Christian soldiers performing in battle and getting miracles for their prayers. Fascinating. And then, of course, we have St. Gregory the Great in Epistle 74, who speaks to a man by the name of Gennadius on how to behave, referencing his time as a prominent military leader. He said, "To Gennadius, patrician and exarch of Africa, as the Lord hath made your excellency to shine with the light of victories in the military wars of this life, so ought you to pose the enemies of the church with all activity of mind and body, to the end that from both kinds of triumph, your reputation may shine forth more and more, when in forensic wars, too, you firmly resist the adversaries of the Catholic Church in behalf of the Christian people, and bravely fight ecclesiastical battles as warriors of the Lord." And of course, what an exarch was, in explanation, basically the Emperor Maurice, sometimes between AD 585 and AD 590, he created this office of exarch, which combined the supreme civil authority of a praetorian prefect and the military authority of a magister militum. So this was a civil and a military leader that St. Gregory was writing this epistle to, and he said, "Defend the faith with the same vigor and the same effort and energy that you fought in the battles that you fought in, and the way that you distinguish yourself there. Distinguish yourself as a Christian leader. Fight for the faith. Be a warrior of Christ, everything." So, it's pretty important that we recognize that very early on, the church fathers were perfectly comfortable with this, perfectly comfortable. And, I have one saint here too who is fascinating. St. Demetrios was born in Thessaloniki in Greece in 270 AD. And he came from a wealthy family, and because he was athletic in appearance and heroic in spirit, he became a high-ranking officer in the Roman army at a very young age. And this is why he's depicted in Byzantine icons in military dress, either standing or riding in a horse. And he considered himself a soldier of Christ first and a military soldier second. He spent most of his time as a devout missionary, preaching the gospel at secret meetings and converting pagans to the Christian faith. And at one of these meetings, he was captured and placed in front of the Emperor Maximian, who wanted to learn the truth about the conversions. And St. Demetrios proclaimed his faith by saying, "Only in Christ do I believe." And with that proclamation, Maximian ordered that St. Demetrios be sent to prison and subjected to the cruelest tortures. And even though St. Demetrios was imprisoned, he did not stop preaching the gospel to those who came to see him. In jail, he was visited by his follower Nestorius. And Nestorius was a man of small stature, and he had come to ask for his beloved teacher's blessing to fight in the upcoming gladiatorial games, because the emperor had decided to use the games as a duel between Christianity and paganism by challenging any Christian to fight against the athletic giant Leo. And in a literal Davidic moment, as David prefigured this moment, with the blessing of St. Demetrios, Nestorius fought and killed Leo. It's a perfect example of gladiatorial combats, one-on-one combat. No, I'm going to defend the armies of the living God. I'm going to defend God. You can't defame Christ, and if you give me the opportunity to fight and to prove that God is real, I will take that. I will fight. I don't care if I'm small. I don't care if I can't fight. 5 smooth stones, and I'll take out the giant Goliath or the giant Leo. And with the blessing of St. Demetrios, and he fought and killed Leo, and enraged at the loss of his favorite gladiator, naturally, the emperor commanded that Nestorius be beheaded on the spot. And he recognized that St. Demetrios was the inspiring power behind Nestorius, so the emperor ordered that St. Demetrios be executed by spear on October 26, 306 AD. And the Christians buried the body of St. Demetrios at the place of his execution, and because of the beautiful scent that emanated from his tomb, he was named Mirovlitus, or the Myrrh Gusher. And they actually made a movie about him in 1952 called Demetrius and the Gladiators, loosely inspired by this historic personage. The last person, of course, that I'm going to mention is Saint Constantine, otherwise known as Constantine the Great. And I think this person is going to wrap up everything that we were talking about, because I think it's basically the perfect example of how this all works when everything is aligned appropriately. St. Constantine received a vision under the sign of the cross, and he received a vision, and under the sign he conquered. Early in the 4th century began the longest and most extensive persecution ever waged against the church, and it was started in 303 by the Emperor Diocletian. At the urging of his deputy emperor in the east, Galerius, who began to suspect the loyalty and the valor of the Christian soldiers in the military. During this 9-year persecution, soldier martyrs like St. George of Nicomedia proved their courage in enduring fearsome tortures and death on behalf of the true emperor, the King of Glory. After Diocletian abdicated the throne in 305, Galerius became the emperor in the east, and he continued the attack against Christianity until he was on his deathbed, when he asked the Christians to pray for him. After his death in 311, his former deputy emperor, Maximian, renewed the persecution for another year until he was overthrown by Licinus. Meanwhile, Constantine was proclaimed emperor in the west in York, England, in 306, upon the death of his father, the deputy emperor Constantius, in 312. As Constantine was moving with his troops towards Rome to fight against Maxentius, the tyrannical ruler there, he had a vision, or a dream, that dramatically changed the course of history. Dramatically. He saw in the sky, it was either a cross or a labarum, which is a Christian symbol, of Christ with the words, "In this sign conquer." And he placed this Christian symbol on his troops' tunics and shields. And they won that battle, which is the battle known as the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And with this Christ-inspired victory, Constantine not only became the sole emperor in the West, he also became a stronger believer in the God of the Christians. So he acted very quickly to bring the era of persecutions to Christians to an official end. In February of 313 AD, Constantine met Licinus, the ruler of the eastern half of the emperor, in Milan. Together, they issued the Edict of Milan, giving freedom to Christians to practice their faith in the empire, as well as affirming general religious freedom for everyone. Now recognized as a legal entity, the church expanded and flourished greatly during the 4th century. So much so that in the last decade of the century, Emperor St. Theodosius the Great, with advice from St. Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, made Christianity the official state religion of the empire. In about 320, though, the Eastern Emperor Licinus began persecuting Christians in the military again. The 40 martyrs of Sebastian and the great martyr Theodore Stratilates, Theodore Stratilates, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but we'll go with that, died for Christ in this time, partly because of this betrayal by Licinus of the Edict of Milan. Constantine led his troops against him. By 324, Constantine had defeated Licinus, thus becoming sole emperor of the whole empire, both east and west. And it's really important to, I think, to read a little excerpt from the actual Edict of Milan. I think it's really cool to read this historical document because they wrote together, when with happy auspices, I, Constantius Augustus, and I, Licinus Augustus, had arrived at Milan and were inquiring into all matters that concerned the advantage and benefits of the public, among other measures directed to the general good, or rather as questions of highest priority, we decided to establish rules by which respect and reverence for the deity would be secured, i.e., to give the Christians and all others liberty to follow whatever form of worship they chose, so that whatsoever divine and heavenly powers that exist might be enabled to show favor to us and to all who live under our authority. We have given the said Christians free and absolute permission to practice their own form of worship. With regard to the Christians, we also give this further ruling. In the letter sent earlier to your dedicatedness, I love that. I just had such fascinating terms. To your dedicatedness, precise instructions were laid down at an earlier date with reference to their places where earlier on it was their habit to meet. We now decree that if it should appear that any persons have bought these places, either from our treasury or from some other source, they must restore them to these same Christians without payment and without any demand for compensation, and there must be no negligence or hesitation. All this property is to be handed over to the Christian body immediately by energetic action on your part without any delay. And since the aforesaid Christians not only possessed those places where it was their habit to meet, but are known to have possessed other places also, belonging not to individuals, but to the legal estate of the whole body, i.e., of the Christians, all this property, in accordance with the laws set forth above, you will order to be restored without any argument whatever to the aforesaid Christians. That's pretty amazing. Not only do you have to stop persecuting the Christians, but you have to give them their property back. And this is the kind of justice that we expect to get from our rulers. This is why Paul and Peter say that the sword in the hands of the government is a good thing, because they're not a terror to us. They're a terror to those that do evil. And when they operate correctly, things are beautiful. And in the next year, after defeating the treacherous Licinus, Emperor Constantine had a dream which he believed was given to him by God, directing him to build a magnificent Christian city at the site of the ancient town of Byzantium. Very strategically located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, this city was officially founded in 324 and dedicated in 330 as Constantinople, meaning the city of Constantine. In the new imperial capital, the emperor helped to build churches there, in particular the Church of the Holy Apostles, where he was buried upon his death in 337. And for all of Constantine's great efforts on behalf of the Christian church and in promoting its influence in his vast domain, and for his own repentance and life of faith, he is revered in the Eastern Church as Saint Constantine the Great, equal to the apostles. He and his illustrious mother, St. Helen, are honored together on May 21st. Interestingly, he is not considered a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. No doubt partly because of his permanent removal of the imperial capital from Rome to Constantinople. I think Constantine perfectly wraps up what we're trying to talk about. And I went way long today because I had such an enormous amount of evidence that we needed to talk about, an enormous amount of things that were relevant to the subject. We needed to talk about the scriptures. We needed to talk about the saints. We needed to talk about the early church fathers and how they interpreted what it means to be Christian. We needed to talk about historical examples. And I think we basically covered everything that we need to. And with the life of Constantine, we get to see what a Christian world begins to look like. A capital city founded by a Christian, filled to the brim with churches, overflowing with Christianity, and which would last unchallenged for 1,000 years. That kind of thing is beautiful. It's powerful. And it's good. And that is what it's meant to fight for Christianity. We're not supposed to be weak-willed, weak-kneed, flopping around on the floor like a fish, letting anybody run all over us. There wouldn't be any Christians left if we did that. We'd all be destroyed if nobody was willing to fight for the faith. All be destroyed. But it's strength, it's endurance, it's being willing to fight, being willing to not only be martyred, but to take up arms as a Christian soldier and fight for Christianity, like the nation of Armenia did. Incredible, like Constantine did when he fought against the tyrannical emperors and established Christianity as the primary religion of all of Rome and all of the Roman civilization. And it's beautiful. It's incredible. It's heroic. And hopefully we see now that pacifism really doesn't have any role to play in the church. It's not a part of being manly at all. It's not. There's no real argument for it anywhere. God is not a pacifistic God. Do not imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. With that, we're going to be done. Thank you for listening. Tremendously appreciate every single one of you incredible people. If you're still here with me after an hour and a half, hopefully I've earned a like, maybe a subscribe. I know we covered a lot of ground today. I went on and on and on and on and on about a lot of different subjects, but hopefully it was fun. It was very informative to me to go and study and research all of this kind of stuff. I put a ton of energy and effort into researching all this because I wanted to know. I want to know what the answer is. All I'm interested in is the truth. I believe that the truth will set us free, so therefore, I pursue the truth. And I think you guys are right up there with me. We're interested in the truth together. So thanks for listening. Stay strong out there. I'll catch you all next time. This has been the Traditional Press Podcast. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for more traditional ideas and exploration of the why behind the what.